Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand, owner of the company Horns of Odin. As always, before we jump to the show, I do have to plug our Patreon. It's how we keep the lights on. It's the lifeline of the show. I'm going to keep it short this week because I want to get into today's show. So if you can, pop over to Patreon/Nordic Mythology podcast. Starts from £3 a month. You get early access. You get access to live shows. The entire back catalogue at this point, we've got over 260 episodes only available on our Patreon with amazing guests. So please go and check that out. If you can, a 5-star rating, positive review wherever you get your podcast. Maybe somebody new will discover us and they will fall in love with the show. But with that said, let's get into today's show. We have two fantastic guests, but first I have to introduce my lovely co-host, who I sometimes may forget, but not today.
You got there, Dan.
Mags Havgar, and our in-house archaeologist.
Hi,
Mags?
everyone. I also want to say, for those of you who are catching this episode after it's been aired, so a few weeks in the future for us currently, if you are watching the video of this, we are filming this on Halloween, which is why I'm wearing bat wings. So that's all I'll say, and then we can move on to the episode.
So we have two fantastic guests. Both of these were, like I said, bucket list guests for me, and it's such an achievement. The podcast has been going quite a while now, and to have these two ladies join is, I'm really pleased to kind of get here. So firstly, Carolyne has joined us before, but Professor Carolyne Larrington is an author and an emeritus fellow at St. John's College at the University of Oxford, and has previously occupied the chair of Professor of Medieval and European Literature. Carolyne, welcome, and thank you for joining us again.
Hello, it's great to be back.
And our second guest, the first time joining, Professor Kat Jarman, who is a Norwegian archaeologist and author specializing in the Viking Age and Viking women, authoring the critically acclaimed books River Kings and The Bone Chests. Kat, thank you for joining us.
No, thank you so much for inviting me. A pleasure to be here.
Oh, is that a little doggy somewhere?
I'm so sorry. Ibsen just jumped.
Was that yours?
Ibsen just jumped down from the guest bed immediately as Kat started talking. I was like, that's bad timing, man.
We love dogs here, so that's absolutely fine. Thank you both for joining us. Carolyne, thank you for coming back. I know you were episode 200, was it?
Something like that. I think it was a round number anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember I was super excited that Bob booked you. So I'm really looking forward to this. And then Kat, like I said in the email, River Kings was one of the early books that I read. I say read, I listened to. And you narrated that. So hearing your voice kind of now is a little bit strange. And I fell in love with the book. I think it was fantastic. So it's a pleasure to have you on here.
Thank you. I'm happy to hear that.
And so we're going to talk about Valkyries and Shieldmaidens. Now, some people may wonder why that is a choice for Halloween, but I think we'll maybe find out as we go along, as that maybe Valkyries aren't the chainmail, bikini, sexy women that are portrayed in modern culture.
I dare the listeners to guess which of the current people here are not employed in an academic position.
That is a pop culture thing, yeah. I think.
Mm-hmm. But most of our listeners are coming into this probably from a pop culture background, and they see, just even a little bit off topic, I guess. There's something about the Vikings that is inherently, well, I say inherently, but is popularized as sexy. And I don't know what is. I was talking with a friend about this today before the show, actually, that you look at any other era, like the Romans, Greeks, maybe Spartans, thanks to 300, but all these different time periods, they're not sexy, but the Vikings seem to transcend that and especially in popular culture, have that appeal. And I've always I've wondered what that is. I wonder why they do that.
That's a topic for another show, I think. Yeah.
It is, yeah.
Thank you, Carolyne. I think that was an important kind of let's just put a pin in that for now, because if not, we're never going to get to what we're trying to talk about.
No, it is. But, okay, so Shieldmaidens and Valkyries. Carolyne, you said we should start with Valkyrie. So maybe an overall look at what a Valkyrie is. Obviously, you look more at the literature, and then Kat the more archaeological and physical evidence we have.
Okay, well let's wade in with the Valkyries then. So they turn up from time to time in Old Norse literature. There's a list of them in one of the poems of the Poetic Edda, where we're told that they're the ladies of Odin. Odin sends them off to the battlefield to bring home to Valhalla, to Valhalla, the dead heroes. And Odin wants them because he's stocking up on a big army ahead of Ragnarok. He needs all the help he can get. So he has dead heroes in Valhalla training on a daily basis for the great final battle. And the Valkyries, most of the time, go out and you guess Odin gives them a little checklist of names and says, make sure you bring these guys home. And off they go and do that. And what we have in a couple of the more historically based poems, there's some quite nice scenes where the Valkyrie turns up to tell a king of Norway. There's one poem where Haakon the Good has finally met his end on the battlefield, and he is escorted by a Valkyrie called Gundr to Valhalla, and he is so cross about it. He's really choked, and Odin is saying, hey, welcome, Haakon. You fought really, really well. That's great. I'm sorry your side lost, but here you are in Valhalla. And he's still moaning at the Valkyrie. Why have you brought me here? And she said, well, Odin sent for you. And then he's really kind of truculent about going into Valhalla. And so the idea that Old Norse has about Valkyries is that they are at least semi-divine. They belong to whole conspectors of beings who are associated with fate and death, who are all gendered female in Old Norse. The goddess of death is Hel. And so they belong to that kind of sinister feminine that is the sort of antithesis of the macho military culture of Viking era fighting. And I think we also have to think of them as not as beautiful and bikini clad and chainmail wearing as popular culture might suggest. But I recently saw a production of Die Walküre in Wagner's Ring Cycle at the Royal Opera House, where the Ride of the Valkyries came up, and the Valkyries all came in, and they were bloody right up to their wrists. They were wearing kind of sacking aprons and Wellingtons, and it was clear that they were kind of slaughterhouse workers. And you got this sudden sense of how blood-soaked the role of the Valkyrie is, that she's down there in the battle taking you and you. She's not killing people, because that's what the opposing side are doing. But she's taking those corpses, she's putting them on the horse and taking them back to Valhalla. In popular culture, you quite often see Valkyries with wings, but they don't have wings. They ride these invisible horses through the air. And so that's the kind of basic idea about them, that they're these battle goddesses, and they do Odin's bidding, except when they don't.
So when you say they don't choose who dies, I guess if they're given a list ahead of time, the death would already be pre-decided. So do they just wait for what happens to happen and then pick them up, or do you think they have a more, I don't know, active role in it?
I think the sense is that they've got a bit of leeway. And so in the story of Brunhilde, who's the best known of the Valkyries, perhaps, but she's kind of a shield maiden as well, because she's sort of semi-divine, but she's also human. She's got a brother. She's got a father. But she's sent by Odin to a battle where there's an old king fighting the young king. And she's been told that the young guy has got to die. And she looks at the pair of them and she goes, "Nah, no, I like the young one. I'm going to take out the old one." And for this, Odin is incredibly cross with her and condemns her to being put to sleep on the top of this flaming mountain top. She's now retired as a Valkyrie, and she's got to marry the hero who makes his way to the mountain top and wakes her up. So she's on this kind of cusp of, is she human, is she divine? And when Wagner picks that up, he has Wotan take her divinity away from her and say, right, and now you're human. Now you can die. And now you have to marry. So mostly the Valkyries appear to do exactly what Odin tells them, but you do have this kind of wayward instance where Brynhilde just thinks, no, not going to do it.
Oh, that's fun. It gives a little bit of difference to it. Okay, so I guess to Kat, what archaeological evidence to support a Valkyrie? Can we even have anything? Because I assume we don't have anything that is, a little figure that has writing on it. This is a Valkyrie, like we have with a Mjolnir that says this is a hammer. Luckily enough.
Yeah, no, sadly not. That would be great, wouldn't it? But there are.
If they just marked everything with what it was.
Exactly. Here's the definition. That would be great. But no, but there are figures that could be argued to fit quite well. And this is where we get into this sort of discussions of Shieldmaidens, sort of fighting women, because they are clearly women. So we can see, when we're talking about them being all sort of sexy and bikini clad and whatever, I thought about this a bit earlier on. Some of these figures that may be Valkyries, we don't know, do have quite long, elaborate hairstyles, and they've also got dresses. So there's something very specific about how they dress and how they are shown. And maybe that was in the Viking Age seen as sort of sexy and exciting. I don't know. You never know.
Maybe.
But that's the closest you get. So you do have these little figures. They can either be little amulets or they can be figurines. Also, the ones I really like are on tapestries. So the Oseberg ship tapestry, for example, has got a lot of women. They are associated there with a funeral. And so this idea that they've got a link to death and to the afterlife and to fate, that I think, and certainly in that example, that tapestry, there's something there. There's something about these women who clearly have a role. We don't know what the role is, but there seems to be a procession and there are women there. Some of them are holding things. Some of them are holding swords. Are they just normal women who just happen to take part? I don't know. Are they some representations of these Valkyries or of some other sort of priestess type figure? That we don't know. But I think if you read and take the sort of the facts essentially of those written sources and then apply them to this archaeology, I think there is definitely some support there, that there is a link and that there's something there. I think that is a connection, even if we can't prove it.
Well, yeah. Max, do you have anything to add? Because obviously you work with those tapestries.
Not at the moment. No, I've just finished redrawing all of them. So
brilliant.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a hurdle, but it's a lot of fun. And what I think is really cool is that the hair thing that you mentioned, Kat. Because even though I can't say for certain that this is definitely a Valkyrie thing, but there is something going on with hair and headdresses. Sometimes it's, especially regarding the Oseberg tapestry specifically, it's almost impossible to discern is this a headdress that becomes hair at some point? I don't know, but there's definitely something going on. But
that's really
But it is,
and you do have images, don't you? I'm thinking of some of the Gotland picture stones where you have a mounted warrior coming to a hall, and there's a woman outside with a horn. And one of the things that the Valkyries are said to do in Valhalla is bring mead to the fallen heroes. And so in previous times, it was quite frequently the case that people would say, oh, look, mounted warrior, hall, woman, horn, it's a dead man coming to Valhalla. And here is the Valkyrie welcoming him with a horn of mead. But then the argument was made equally, this could be a regular guy coming home after a hard day's work, and that's his wife giving him a horn of mead. And there's no sign showing this guy is dead or welcome to Valhalla over the door of the hall. So how Valkyries
every man's
are
wife is
different
his Valkyrie.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure you want your wife to be a death bringer, exactly.
No, okay. Yeah, you've got a point. When you say, do we ever see examples of Valkyries bringing female warriors? I know you said there's mentions of, different stories of Valkyries interacting with the people they're going to be kind of taking to Valhalla. Do we get that?
No, because there are very few stories in which women are depicted as fighting. There are stories where women have say, look, I'm basically a retired shield maiden. I used to have a great time. I fought with the Emperor of Byzantium. I fought in this battle and that battle. And then I got married and had to give it up. And there's a kind of nostalgia about that. But we don't have any sense that women can themselves go to Valhalla.
Mm-hmm. Is it anything saying that they can't?
No, except I guess Snorri Sturluson tells us that Hell's Hall down in Niflheim, in the kind of world of mist, is where those who don't die in battle go, and women, and those who die of sickness, basically. And so we do get a quite strong sense that that's who Hell has in her hall. They're all having a kind of nice enough time, I guess. They've still got mead and benches to feast on. So it's not as grim as the Christian idea of hell.
One thing that comes to mind, I think this was mentioned a couple of weeks ago, is I think it was last week actually, is the idea that that was it. Sorry. That was my mind working in real time. So we had a lady on last week who does like strength events, but like they're set in very kind of Viking-esque, very kind of rudimentary lifting logs, that kind of thing. So she was mentioning that wrapping of the chest really helped her with some of the competitions because it's an open category. It's male and female. There isn't kind of that split between genders. And she said that wrapping the chest was something that really helped because obviously it kept everything
in place,
kind of flat and tight. You mentioned before these figures having a the long hair and looking feminine, but I know through kind of conversations like that, and I guess speaking with Lesha Gedelia years ago, I don't think it was related to the Viking Age, but he mentioned about how some female warriors would make themselves look male to blend in, to skirt the rules, I guess. So is there a kind of juxtaposition, I guess, between figures who would look feminine, but then possibly women needing to be more masculine to be shield maidens?
Are you talking
did that make
like
sense?
from the written sources now, Dan, or like from the visual media?
Well, in both, I guess, archaeologically and in the written media. Like, if we have these figures that we think would be shield maiden and Valkyrie, but they seem to be very feminine with the long hair, I guess, the dress. Does that kind of contradict the idea of possibly women having to be more like dressing more masculine to fit in to fight?
Like a Mulan type situation?
I hope that makes sense. Yeah, like are they kind of to then identify the figures?
If they're kind of cross-dressing to go into battle, in effect.
Well,
yeah,
well, whether that was a thing, but does that kind of, like, say, counteract the thought then that these figures would be shield maidens of Valkyries? Because would shield maidens look feminine in battle? Okay. Because maybe Did I get there? I feel flustered. I was like,
Well,
I was like trying to figure it out.
From Saxo Grammaticus from the year of 1200, and it's a bit of a suspect story. I think it's about a princess called Alfhild in Scandinavian, and she has basically has kind of live-in dragon where she lives. And the dragon is a bit problematic. And her father says, anyone who can kill the dragon can marry my daughter. So this hero, whose name I think is called Ulrich or something, turns up and kills the dragon. And Alfhild says, oh, yeah, well, okay, I guess I'll go marry him then. And her mother says, oh, I don't know that you should marry just the first dragon slayer who comes along. I think you should think long and hard about this. And Alfhild is made so cross by this that she and a group of women at the court run off and become pirates.
Nice.
And so they're sailing around the Baltic, attacking other ships, raiding them, taking the stuff off them. And Ulrich is going, well, what happened to my fiancé? I don't know what to do with myself now. I'll just go and do some raiding in the Baltic as well. And of course, inevitably, his ship is attacked by her ship. And they have a big battle, and the men are overcoming the women. And then one of them pulls off the helmet of a fallen warrior, and all this hair streams out. And they go, and what Saxo Grammaticus says, then they realize they should be fighting with kisses, not with swords. And so the men persuade the women to get back in their female clothing, all get married to them, including Alfhild marrying Ulrich, and the pirate life is over. Now that sounds very suspicious to me, because it sounds exactly as if Saxo has been thinking about Amazons. And one of the kind of tropes about Amazons fighting is that moment where a Greek warrior and an Amazon warrior are fighting, and then he pulls the helmet off and all this hair comes out, and he goes, oh, you're a lovely woman, and then falls in love or something like that. So I'm not sure how authentic it is as a tradition, but it suggests that in practical terms, you've got to be wearing male clothes to actually fight on the battlefield. You can't be running around the battlefield in a dress and with lots of hair flowing, because your enemies are going to grab hold of your hair and it's going to be a complete liability.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think in terms of archaeology, I mean, obviously the whole issue of female warriors or not is a big discussion. I don't know if we've got time to go into that today. But in terms of looking at gender and sex and equipment and kit and gear in general, we don't really recognize the Viking Age really much of a sort of women's tools and men's tools. And, you know, there's not, you know, other than sort of if you go into women do weaving or whatever, but in terms of size or type or anything like that. So I think the idea that you would have specific gear or clothing or whatever, if you were a female sort of Shieldmaiden fighter, Valkyrie, whatever, as opposed to a male one, I think it's a practical. So it's exactly what you were saying now about the hair and, you know, whatever you need to, it's all practical. And so personally, from the archaeological record as well, in terms of general Viking Age kit, we don't really see sort of gender division. Size maybe for certain things, you know, if you've got a big hand and you've got a weapon or a tool, maybe, but generally speaking, things seem to be quite standardized. And so if you happen to be female and you were using something. So I don't know if that sort of answers the question as well. I think so maybe those depictions where they are showing long hair and holding a sword or whatever is because they are showing something specific. So just going back. So, and I'm just picking up something you said earlier, Max, about the headdress or sort of headdress slash kind of hair. And if you look at other cultures and other societies, and the ideas of headdresses representing a role is a really interesting one. So again, looking at that depiction of potentially a Valkyrie, that the hair slash headdress, so many, you know, all over going back thousands of years, the headdress as a sort of important characteristic is a really important one. So I can see that as well, just to sort of loop back to that point.
No, but I think that's really interesting, because I think what you're saying there is, it's from, at least from what I've been working on, is it seems like that idea has a lot to it. And also because that's why I think it's so interesting to compare it to the textual material that we have, because the figures that I'm personally looking at they are gendered. How do I put this? To just throw like a big wrench into the conversation. They are gendered by us in a way. Because when I look at them, what I realized very quickly, like physically drawing them, is that there are no... This touches on the whole biological gender or biological sex and societal gender thing. So, but we're all aware of that. So let's just leave that for now. But there are no like physical indicators of gender and or sex that I could find. There are no like voluptuous forms. There are no boulders. There are no facial hair. Nothing. It's just length of hair and type of dress, which makes it so to me, all these figures look kind of like cardboard cutouts in a way that are kind of androgynous, completely ungendered, and
they're all in profile, aren't they?
They're all in profile.
Yeah.
And what's then interesting to me is it might very well be the case that their clothing and their hairstyles are indicative of gender. But what if it actually also then maybe symbolizes something, or like not necessarily just symbolizes, but is communicating something different? What if it's not simply communicating gender, but role, like you said with the hairdress, Kat? Like what are we looking at? Is it just man and or woman? Is that it? Or are we digging into something maybe a bit more layered here?
Yeah. I think what if we didn't have the written sources, if we didn't know about Valkyries, but we've never heard that word, would we still have the same sort of interpretations?
Yeah.
As an archaeologist, I always come back to that because I always go, well, written sources. But, if we didn't have them, would we still come to the same conclusions? And I sort of feel like, we should be able to do that. But so that's one interesting thing on that. And also, again, on, gender, again, it's a completely different conversation probably, but, were they as interested in that ourselves? I don't know, but I guess the Valkyries were always female, weren't they? So that's a very clear distinction. There's no male Valkyrie.
No, and I think that does link into this kind of sense of a continuum of these female figures, like the Fates. The Norns are female, and that women, and it's not just the three named Norns who we find in the poem Völuspá, the Ceres' prophecy, but there are other Norns as well who are also involved in helping with childbirth. So there's the idea that the Norns are there when the hero is born, and they create his fate in some way by twining threads or by carving something on chips of wood. And then we don't have that kind of dramatic thing you have in Greek myth where one of the fates just goes snip, that's it, the thread of your life is over. But we do have a wonderful poem which is quoted in Njál Saga, and it's about the eve of the Battle of Clontarf in 1014, where a man in Scotland is riding along and he comes to a hut. And he peeps inside this hut, and there he sees a group of Valkyries weaving the fate of the battle. And it goes back to what I was talking about before, that Valkyries are not pretty, comforting women, that they're kind of deeply covered in the blood of the heroes that they're going to bring home. And in this poem, he looks and sees these Valkyries weaving, and he's quite horrified by the fact they've got a loom set up, and the warp threads are entrails, and the weights that are holding the entrails down are human heads, decapitated human heads, and they're using a spear to weave backwards and forwards through the warp thread, through the warp, that's right. And as they're doing, they're singing this song about how they're weaving the fates of the men who are going to be in this battle. And at the end of the poem, it's about 12 stanzas long, and if we got time later on, I could read a bit of this if you like. They tear the piece of cloth made of entrails off the loom, and they cut it into tear it into four pieces, and they each ride off in a different cardinal direction. And he kind of reels away from the hut and goes, oh God, what did I see? And then later he finds out that there's this major battle in Ireland that really changes the fate of Ireland in some ways, at least of the Scandinavian settlement there. And this was what he saw being carved out or being woven together on the loom.
That's quite horrific.
It's really hardcore.
It's great. It's very suitable for Halloween, I think, this idea of them with the entrails.
And I love the added layer of like, oh, like men go to battle and women do the weaving, and then you have that like example of weaving.
I think it's quite a deeply entrenched idea that fate is woven.
Yeah.
Because it's a complicated thing. And although we have a couple of references to fate being twined, so it's like when you've been spinning wool and you're twining the different strands together to make something that you can actually use for darning or for weaving with. And that's quite linear in a sense. But when it comes to weaving, you can weave all kinds of different patterns in. And I'm sure that's why the Oseberg tapestries, for example, have got this kind of multi-dimensional feeling to them that makes their presence in a funeral deposit speak to things being more complicated than just 1 minute you're alive and the next minute you're dead.
Yeah.
And they tell a story as well, don't they? They tell a story of an event and a life. And you think in other tapestries, or Bayeux tapestry or whatever, they all tell a story. Which I like, this idea that you're weaving a life and then you've got depictions of a story in a place where, and a time, at least that sort of 9th century, you don't have the written sources in that same way, but these depictions that are woven tell the story of an event or a life as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it gives us like a visual aspect to it rather than just an item. I think that's a great point, Caroline, that I had a little light bulb moment, which I have very often on here, that I'm a modern man, I guess, and I've never knitted or made anything out of fabric, but just that idea of having to make the thread or I guess just the thread, make the thread before you can make the item is another thing that they would have had to do and understand, and another kind of dimension to it that probably most people in the modern day don't realize, because you just go and buy yarn from the shop, you go and buy your thread. So I guess a lot of people think it just kind of comes like that and don't appreciate the work that would have to go into of actually, like, I don't know, what was the word for
twining?
Yeah, twining or
spinning. Twining. So so you have to twine the thread before you can do anything else. And that is, like I say, another aspect and dimension that a lot of people probably don't think of because we don't see it. We just have machines that do it now. I've never had to do it. I did see it.
It's difficult. There's a knack to it.
Yeah. And spinning with a distaff and a drop spindle is really difficult as well. That's what women were spending a lot of their time doing, was processing that wool from the,
and then also
the kind of clumpy wool from the sheep into something that you could actually weave with.
And then the resources as well, and with the sheep and keeping and tending the sheep and picking the wool. And just as a completely aside, I've recently become an alpaca owner and learning about alpaca. But it takes a year before you even get a fleece from each alpaca, and you've got to look after them, you've got to feed them every day. So there's a hell of a lot involved. And I know there's sort of calculations have been done on how many sheep are actually needed for a single sail in the Viking Age. So actually all the resources are not just a difficulty of actually doing it, but all those resources that go into it. If you just look at those animals, you have to keep them alive. You've got to select the right mate for the next, to get the best wool. There's so much to that. So it's a sort of clearly a sort of deeply entrenched in that society, and so much knowledge and skill that's involved as well, which I find quite fascinating.
There really is, because even when you do have the fleece, you're not really done, because there are different types of fleece, and you have the top coat and you have the undercoat, and what type of fiber are you actually looking for, and the weight of spindle will also dictate the thickness of the thread that you will eventually make, which will then dictate the strength of your fabric and the details and the blah 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 blah.
Yeah,
I think fabric is probably an underappreciated material in the modern day because it's so cheap. Clothes are so cheap. You can pick fabric up very cheap. It's very different to how it would have been in the Viking Age. It would be such a valuable commodity. And I think most people, being the non-academic here and kind of having that that outsider mindset, maybe, that a lot of people I think wouldn't appreciate that. They don't maybe appreciate the time it takes to make a sail, or even just clothes. You wouldn't have
well,
a
that's what
wardrobe
women
of
were
5
doing
tunics.
most of the time when they weren't looking after the sheep. Mostly the sheep are up in Iceland anyway. They're up in the mountains taking care of themselves. But women, when they're not preparing food, they're making textiles because they're responsible for the clothing of the family, unless they've got a Viking husband or brother or son who goes abroad and comes back with a very flashy cloak that he's bought somewhere or acquired abroad, and with gold embroidery, and he can swank around in that, and people can go, oh, look what he's wearing. But it's the kind of endless women's work is quite invisible in some way, which is why transposing it from just the kind of mundane thing that women are doing all the time to shaping men's fates is such a powerful metaphor, I think, for this particular female domain.
I would like to think it was much more appreciated in the Viking Age, because it's the matter of being warm and cozy. You know, all these things.
Society has a hard time if you suddenly lose access to all textiles. Yeah,
I think at some point in human history, it's become like a menial task associated with women, wrongfully so. I think at some point that's happened. And maybe that sticks around today to a certain degree. But I would like to think that in the Viking Age that it would actually be it would be seen for the importance.
It might have been more aware of it.
Is.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I think that people would appreciate it. It wouldn't be, you know, a menial woman's task. It's a very important role, and that it has the respect. I would like to think that anyway. That would be. Nice.
Now, this high-quality woolen cloth that they were producing in Saga Age Iceland was a unit of currency. So you would take your vadmal down to the shore when the Norwegian ships came in, and you would use it to trade with. So you could get wood or something that you needed from Norway, and you could give them vadmal in return. And if somebody is killed, usually you compensate with silver, but you can also use this vadmal as being sufficiently valuable to pay compensation with.
So there's also some suggestions that some of these women who were very much in charge of the textile work became extremely wealthy in the Viking Age. And even the Oseberg women perhaps were closely linked to the textile industry, certainly Western Norway. I think there's a lot of indications and clues that it was this industry that was actually essentially bringing in a lot of money for these women who were in charge of it, and especially with if a lot of the men are out and away on raids or whatever, and you have these women are back, essentially having a huge sort of role in society because of this important. I mean, you see the textile industry
running the show, really, aren't they? Yes, if all the men who are capable of fighting and raiding have sailed off.
Exactly, and also if you look at textile industry in Britain, before that all sort of went down, wool industry and the whole towns that were just built on the wool industry, and if you just sort of take that back to the Viking Age and sort of then see that female link to it, it shows something quite powerful actually. So I think that again links quite nicely into this idea that you have these powerful women in mythology as well because of those real life and mythological or sort of textual, whatever it is, where they are links.
Yeah.
I grew up, I live in Huddersfield, which is one of the big wool producers, or was one of the big wool producers, like Huddersfield, Halifax, Bradford. Those areas were very big of like the British fabric trade, I guess. I had a really bizarre thought then for a second. I don't know if any of you will have the answer for this or not. Obviously, textile was expensive. Clothing would have been important. So then when somebody is killed, do we see examples of that being taken? Because obviously we know that swords would be taken, valuables were taken from the bodies. And I've never thought of clothes being taken from bodies before. And is that anything that either literary or archaeologically there are examples of the actual clothes of people's backs being taken? Because obviously it can be reused.
I can't think of any saga examples of people taking the clothes. Because I think that might be in some ways a step too far, that you're leaving the corpse, assuming you hope that after a battle is over, somebody is going to come along and pick the corpse up and give it burial and treat it properly. And I think you probably have a tunic with some holes in it with a lot of blood everywhere. That it might be more trouble than it was worth. But of course, as Kat will confirm, textiles don't tend to survive. So we have no idea what people are buried in.
Exactly. So I think the closest you get would then be the jewellery, but that's sort of different category. So I guess you could see jewellery being reused over time and collected, because you get hoards, especially where there's some amazing hoards, obviously across Scandinavia and other places, but there's some that seem to be family collections of jewellery. Like I'm thinking of the Hoen hoard, for example, in Oslo, which seems to be a woman's collection of jewellery over time. And that sort of to dress, but it's not really clothes, it's not really textiles. But then again, you could have some really wonderfully embroidered items. If you look at the Norwegian tradition now of the bunad, there's a folk costume, which I have one that my mother embroidered for me. And I don't have any daughters, but if I have a daughter-in-law or somebody eventually, I'd love for her to have it and to pass it on. So I guess special textiles you may well have passed on down the generations because they're so valuable. But it's the same thing with weapons. Why are some weapons buried with them and some passed on or taken or whatever? We don't know, why they sometimes decided, maybe if they believed that they needed them for the afterlife, then maybe they kept them. But yeah, it's archaeologically not a question we can answer, sadly.
No. They're just
but it's also, I always think it's really useful to remind everybody who's listening to this that it's kind of truism, isn't it? The dead don't bury themselves. It's the living who make those decisions. And you can kind of imagine thinking, am I going to send Dad off with the best sword or the second best sword? or my cousin wants this sword, so then maybe he can provide another sword that we can use. But I think now we're talking about what we find in graves. I think it would be wrong for us to advertise this conversation as being about Valkyries and Shieldmaidens without talking about the famous Birka grave.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that Kat has something to say about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, where does one begin with that one? But I think what's interesting with some of the topics we've been talking about in terms of this sort of idea about what you're dressed in, and do you look female, or are you, is it clear, is this sort of marked as a female person? This is if we, again, you mentioned earlier, Max, this sort of discussion about sex and gender and all of that. So I'm just going to park that for now. It doesn't mean that we're not acknowledging all of that at all. But if we take the very sort of straightforward, if we accept that this was someone who was biologically female and living life as a woman, but happened to be in a warrior role, if you accept that just as a sort of starting point, there was nothing in that grave to suggest this is a woman, at all. There was nothing in the artifact. There was nothing.
No cooking pots or sewing kits or anything like that, was there?
There was nothing, and there was no dress. There was no sort of special hair ties or whatever.
Or
there was nothing that
was,
it wasn't really, but it was very much sort of equipment based. And so it was very much that sort of role, I suppose. And so that's quite an interesting one. But, that's the eternal question, was this a unique person? This a very high status person? And I always like to remind people that we just have so little evidence in terms of bones especially from Norway. It's a huge part of Norway. A lot of cremations, a lot of really poor conditions. So we can't actually make any sort of estimates of how normal this individual was in that society, and also people just to throw away the bones. They didn't get worried about them, so they'd make an interpretation based on the grave goods. Scrap the bones.
Just to quickly jump in, can we say like categorically 100% that it is a female in that grave, just because I've seen, you know, online a ton of people that the first thing is, well, it must have been, you know, checked wrong or for whatever, insert whatever reason. There's always somebody who's going to say, yeah, but they've done this wrong, or they can't actually tell. So can we say, like, categorically it is a you know, biological female?
Yes, absolutely. And I don't, but you know, that's all just online nonsense. If you look at,
I fall into that trap often.
Yeah, no, they can be very convincing online nonsense, but it is still nonsense. But no, and I know the people involved, I know how good and experienced they are. And the osteologists are just looking at the bones actually suggested female, first of all, and then the DNA, which is very conclusive. So from that sort of biological standpoint, yes, absolutely right. And I know, again, the people who work in the collections, I know they've looked through all the records to double check it's not mixed up, it's not a different skeletons. They've seen matched day against the original drawings that were made as it was excavated, and it is a complete match. I've seen the body myself, you know, in person, and seen it literally next to the drawings. It is a complete match. So
it's so sad that we have to kind of cross those T's and dot the I's, because if it was wrong, it would kind of step this whole thing back so far, because people would just.
But what's interesting about that too,
it,
Dan, is that, like, you know, the Valkyrie comes up again and again and again and again. But like we've mentioned several times on this podcast, there is, you know, biologically female human remains in what we would interpret as a warrior burial that is on exhibit in Oslo, that has been known about for literally decades, and it just is what it is. So for some reason, this Valkyrie burial really gets people up in arms. But we have at least one other example of a very similar case where that's just what it is. It is a biologically female skeleton buried with military accoutrements.
I wonder if it's the switch, because it was, I guess, put out as male, and then a switch, and then some
dang women coming for our jobs.
Men. Yeah, some fragile men went. Yeah, you see it all the time at the minute. You're rewriting history. They're changing it to fit the woke agenda. All that kind of bullshit. So it, you know.
But I had a question that I wanted to get you guys' thoughts on. Also, since I see that we're closing up on 5 at your guys' time, because I see in a lot, not all, but a lot of research, sometimes the words. And this is also coming from the perspective of me being an archaeologist, the usage of the words Shieldmaiden and Valkyrie, I sometimes see them used almost synonymously with each other. So is there a distinction, and should there be a distinction?
Well, as far as the poetry is concerned, you have Valkyries in poems about mythological material and legendary sagas. There's one saga, the saga of the Volsungs, in fact, where a queen is having difficulty getting pregnant, and Odin sends a Valkyrie with an apple, which she eats, and then she's pregnant for 6 years and dies giving birth. But she does have a kind of large heroic baby at the end of it. So that's all kind of highly mythological. But then later on in the same saga, you've got Brynhildr, who is a Valkyrie and has been fighting for Odin, or doing things for Odin. But she's also part of a human family. And when she gets married, she says, basically, I didn't want to get married, but my brother was putting pressure on me. And her brother in this version is Attila the Hun. So if he puts pressure on you, you can either fight back, or you go, okay, yeah, I guess if I want my share of my father's inheritance, I have to do it. So there's a kind of switch in this saga between being semi-divine to suddenly being plonked back in a family situation where you might be able to determine men's fates in battle, but actually you're stuck in the same kind of patriarchal pressures with your father and your brother pushing you around. And we get this in a lot of heroic poetry. So what we don't tend to get is stories in which we see these shield maidens fighting. What we get is people saying, I was a shield maiden and I used to have a great time, but now look, I'm stuck being married to this person. Or there's a couple of references to shield maidens who are killed when somebody sets a hall on fire. So you never get kind of action battle scenes with these women. They're always retired shield maidens or kind of just part of the general audience. And I think that's quite interesting. Apart from Alvild the pirate, which I think is probably borrowed from classical sources.
Yeah.
And Kat, I guess, can we tell the difference between Valkyrie and Shieldmaiden? As you said earlier, if you took away the literary sources, would there be? I guess you wouldn't know the word for this. Is there a way to identify it?
We wouldn't really. So I guess you would then have, a female body with weapons, and that would be somebody fighting. You wouldn't necessarily have that Valkyrie thing, but then you'd have like the tapestries and all the figurines. If you have somebody who looks female with hair, dress, whatever, wearing a sword, you'd go, okay, that's a woman. So I guess, again, we come back to that point of sort of those women who maybe have a sort of ceremonial role as opposed to a more pure basic fighting role. But I think without the written sources, you wouldn't necessarily come to that conclusion. But I mean, the other thing when you spoke about things in action made me think about evidence for violence. And because, of course, the other thing you could look at is evidence for violence on women. So looking at types of violence that might suggest being in battle. But then again, you could be a victim. You could just be somebody in a village, and so if you've got a sword cut. So I guess that would be one way you could also look at the sort of shield maiden role as a sort of very physical, very fighting type role. Again, we're lacking that evidence. We're lacking the actual body.
Isn't it the case that the Birka skeleton doesn't show signs of healed wounds?
Yeah, as far as I know, I'll have to sort of refresh myself. I'm pretty sure, but also it's a very fragmented body, so we don't have a complete body. And healed wounds can be quite difficult to spot. So I think we need to, in this sense, absence of evidence is absolutely not evidence for absence. It's one of those we have to be really careful. Yeah, we have to be really, really careful because it's so difficult to see. If you had a cut or blows, a lot of those battles wounds, if you've survived them, they probably weren't that bad.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it? Yeah.
And actually, most things that kill you don't affect the bone, so it's more likely that you sort of, or unless you actually have your head cut off, or just on Halloween theme.
Great blow to the skull. Yeah, I'm thinking of the bodies that were found in St John's College, the Kendrew Vikings, well, who may or may not have been Vikings, but they were certainly a group of fighting age men who had healed wounds, that some of them that you could see in the bones, that they'd had damage to the wrists which had healed up, or damage to parts of the back. But also you could see what had killed them, which was leaving great holes in their skulls.
Yeah, I think the Weymouth ones as well. I mean, they'd lost their heads; they'd all been decapitated. So that was quite clear. The way they also thought to possibly be a raiding party, but I think they were the ones that didn't really have a lot of healed wounds, and so in that case. But then, I mean, if they survived, they were well enough and healthy enough and survived previous battles, then it might not have been there. Because I think if you think of what sort of injury, if you're in some elite warrior team or crew or whatever, you've got to be really, really fit. So you probably can't have had a really nasty injury that left marks on your bones.
That's deep.
And then, that's really deep. That's really severe. If you don't have penicillin, antibiotics or whatever, chances are of you actually healing really, really well from a really severe injury are probably quite low. Yeah. So you've got to think about healthcare. I was researching healthcare in the Viking Age and trying to, we don't really know much about that and actually what they could do. So I think we just need to be very careful not to think that we have enough evidence of this, because we really don't. No. Sadly.
What about skeletal evidence of like wielding swords or shields. Am I right in thinking that there are some changes to the body when you're doing actions like that repetitively?
So they can be. So if you think, so the example that we tend to use in osteology especially is tennis players. So professional tennis players tend to have really different forearms. So one's much bigger and thicker. So if you look at them on an X-ray, it's completely different because the bone physically becomes bigger because of that really quite severe. So there's that, and there's also,
I think Nadal is a prime example of that. He has just one giant arm.
Yeah, and the Glucksman has been shown osteologically to have tennis elbow.
Yeah, so it could be sword elbow.
Yeah, sword elbow.
Sword elbow, different term. So sad. I think there's some suggestion. I don't know. I actually can't remember now off the top of my head if the Birka woman possibly had some shoulder issues that could be from archery. I think that might be one suggestion. I don't think it was published. I think it was something that somebody looked at, because archery, of course, is one that is very straining, and definitely a lot of archery will show specific physical changes in the shoulder. So if you're a professional archer, so there are things like that. But again, sadly, with the material being so poor, we're unlikely to see it.
Yeah. It's also kind of like knowing what you're looking for to begin with. And in addition, when the material is so heavily fragmented and we don't really know, like you said, healthcare, what would they even do in certain situations? It's almost like you're trying to find pieces to a puzzle, but you don't really know what the puzzle even is.
And then also, were they so specialized? So if you look at, just again, our Birka woman, she's got everything, every type of weapon. So she's got arrows and she's got swords, so I don't know if they would necessarily specialize in just one method. I feel a bit like they were sort of, got an axe, throw the axe, got a sword, wield the sword, so there might be that actually they're not that specialized. They're very versatile, and so they will use what they can. And for that reason, you might not get, they're not tennis players playing tennis every single day. A lot of them are just farmers a lot of the year, and then they go on a raid and they do other things, and then they come back and they do farming again.
That's your hobby.
Yeah.
You go raiding.
Seasonal work, isn't it, really?
Yeah, exactly. Summer job. Gap year. I always think of these gap year boys going on.
What you find in the sagas is you really do get the sense that being a Viking is a young man's game, and when you're 25 or so, it's time to go home with what you've got. If you've survived, you go home with your loot and you get a farm, you settle down, you tell stories about what you did in your youth, and you're quite happy that you've survived. And then you wait till your son grows up and then help him to get the money together for a ship, and off you go. So it's not probably such a career as people tend to think.
No.
Well, it's risky. It's risky business. And unless you really, I guess, have a thirst for that violence, why would you go and do it? If you can get enough money to have a reasonable life, why risk losing all that again on another...
The honor.
The thing for the stories that you can just make up yourself. But I always say this: I'd have just made stories up. When I came back, if there wasn't that many people there to fact check me, I'd have just made up. Yeah, I fought a dragon. There was the Anglo-Saxons. They had a dragon, and I killed it. This guy.
Where are the singe marks? I think we would want to. And where's the gold to prove you actually fought the dragon? I think that's more suspicious.
It was a poor dragon. He wasn't doing too well for himself. That takes away from the story. Hey, Kat, I know you're short on time. If you need to disappear, please feel free. I do want to listen to Carolyne read some of the but Kat, if you do have to disappear, don't worry. It's absolutely fine. I know you're short.
Yes, I may need to leave you early, much as I'd love that. I'll have to catch the poem when I listen back to the episode later. But no, it's been a really, really interesting conversation. I very much enjoyed this.
So happy to hear that.
It's been lovely.
Is there anything that you would want to, not that you necessarily need it? Is there anything you want to plug? or anything before?
No, not really. Just people to be more interested in this and look at read the books and just go to museums and learn. And it's wonderful to see so much interest, actually. And I think when we talk about all that popular culture, I just love the fact that that's bringing people to the academic side and to saying, oh, well, actually, what is real? What's behind it? And what are the sources? What's the archaeology? And I think that's great. So I was listening. Just go and look at the sources. Go and read a book on it. I don't care. It could be mine. It could be somebody else's. Carolyne's are brilliant. So go for it.
Absolutely. But no, I would say pick up River Kings and the Bone Chest.
It's such a great read, River Kings.
Thank you.
I think for me, particularly with River Kings, because I was early on, it was digestible for somebody very early in the in my Viking journey, I guess, and that's important because again, that's the whole reason why the podcast came about. But when I started this, I knew absolutely nothing, and now I would like to think I know a bit. But I was very much kind of on that early point. I was like, where do I look? What do I trust? There's all this information, and a lot of the stuff that I read by the people maybe. I've forgotten the word. Recommend might be scholarly papers that I just couldn't understand because I didn't maybe have the knowledge to understand it yet. Whereas I think with River Kings, particularly, has that gap. It helps people at any point of the journey to understand, and that was I think that's important to get people into this and past that maybe entry level of Vikings don't have horns on their helmets. Viking was a job. Like those typical things that people learn and then go, I know everything about Viking Age now. And I think having books like that help take it that little bit further because they're easy and digestible are important. So I think people should read the two of them.
Oh, thank you. I'm delighted to hear that. Yeah, wonderful.
There we go. Kat, thank you so much. Like I say, I've been wanting to do this for a long time. Hopefully, maybe we could do one again in the future if you ever find the time. But we can talk about that after.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, all.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Take care. Bye. Oh, look at that. Finally got to do it.
Yeah. But I'm also so excited that you brought something to read, Caroline.
I know.
Yeah, so I'm not going to read all 12 verses because I think that's probably a bit much. But I'm going to read the first 3 verses, let's say, because it's got some great Valkyrie names in it as well. Yes. And I'll read the first one in the first couple of verses in Old Norse so you can get a feeling of the rhythm.
Could you repeat the name of the source again?
It's called Darradaljóð, and that's DARRADARLJOZ. And
that's no chance I might ever pronounce.
Durudr is the man who saw the Valkyries through the gaps in the hut, so he's the witness to all of this.
There's no chance I'm ever pronouncing that, but
it's got a lot of R's in it, so that's
yeah.
Okay, I'll read the first verse then, shall I? And then I'll read the translation. So you have to imagine these women with their fingers all bloody from weaving the entrails, and with the spear being used to weave the weft through these entrails, and the dangling human heads. And there's actually a wonderful illustration of this, I think by Thomas Gray, the 18th century poet, made a translation of this poem. And it has a wonderful illustration. I can't remember just off the top of my head who a contemporary artist did the illustration. It wasn't Blake, I don't think. It was someone very like him. Maybe it was Blake. And so if you get the chance to have a look at those images, they're just as gruesome as you might want for Halloween. So here's the first verse. Vit orpid fyr valfatli, rifja reiði rignir blóði, nú fyr geirum grár uppkomin, verfur verþjóðar vinur fylla, róðum vesti randves bana. And that the translation of that is the.
I was saying just before, I don't know if it's the knowing the subject matter or it's the rolling R's. There's just something quite, just not horrific isn't the right
ominous?
word, but it's quite, ominous.
Yeah,
it's
it
very
does sound dark, doesn't it? And you could perhaps
just
hear
that.
in the second line, "Rignir blodi," it rains blood.
It's quite threatening.
Yeah. So it starts off by describing the loom then that they're weaving on, and it's the wide rigging of the crossbeam is cast before the fall of the slain. It rains blood. Now a fabric of a host of men is formed, grey on the count of spears, in which the women friends of the killer of Randvier, and that means the Valkyries, are filling it with a red weft. So you have the grey of the guts and the red of the blood that's the thread that they're running through them. And they go on to say, the fabric is warped with the intestines of men and firmly weighted with the heads of humans and pierced with arrows. Blood-drenched spears serve for heddle rods, iron-clad the shed rod. We must strike this fabric of victory with swords. And then we get the names of some of the Valkyries. Hildur goes to weave and Hjörtrimur. Sangriður and Sweeper with drawn swords. The shaft will snap, the shield will break. The helmet dog, that's the sword, is the term for sword, will come into the shield. So as they're weaving, they're making the battle happen and they're making the weapons fail and the shield break. And then they go on to say, Vindum, Vindum, Vevdarada. Let us wind, let us wind. And then they go on weaving in this way. And Vindum, Vindum keeps coming back to the very end until they finally say, let's ride out hard on barebacked horses with drawn swords away from here. And off they go. Mm-hmm. So if that's not a suitable, horrific poem for Halloween, I don't know what is.
It is, isn't it?
I feel like the only thing, not that I would say that there's anything missing from that poem, but there really isn't. But if there was anything missing from that description, it would just be the smell. Like, what must this have smelled like? Because that's how visceral the description was to me, that I started to wonder, like, what type, like, this room seems intense.
The smell of iron, I mean, blood smells of iron, doesn't it? And the references to iron are, of course, about the swords and the spear points as being metallic. But I think the term iron is also reminding people of the smell at some level. And you can see the kind of rhythm of the weaving is also, in a way, the rhythm of the battle as people are striking. And the swords are going against the shields and the spears are being kind of driven forward. And there are the women going, right, job done.
Yeah.
Off we go.
It's really beautiful, like, beautiful in a terrifying way, but just the way that it's written and the flow, you don't think of, I guess, or a lot of people don't think of Vikings as being like artistic, but it is. It has that feel to it, the way that it kind of rolls and goes. What were you going to say, Max?
I was just going to say that I think that not thinking of the Vikings and the Vikingish society as artistic in the sense that we think of it now, I think is an example of what you were talking about earlier, perhaps. And also that's because of the way it's probably portrayed in pop culture as well. But like, that maybe also is some sort of like something that you learn more and more about, because all these literary sources that we have, in addition to all the insane variety of the visual media of the period, gives indications of the fact that these were people who expressed themselves on so many different levels.
Yeah, and I guess it loses. It's sad because most people, or I don't want to say most people, but a lot of people that are interested in the Viking Day are I would say in the UK and the USA, from my, obviously you have like the Scandinavian countries who it's the culture and the heritage, but like consuming things like the podcast or popular culture, it's huge in the UK and the USA, but you lose the flow when it's then translated into English, something that obviously Carolyne you know about in your own translations of doing the poetic edit. You lose these things, and I guess you have to battle with: do you try and keep the flow and the diction, or do you go accurate?
Yeah, it's always a trade-off between making the translation really accurate, but then losing the rhythm, losing the alliteration, and having to have notes saying, in the original, this is a singular, but I'm translating it as plural for reasons. And yeah, that really breaks up the flow of trying to understand a poem if you do that. Yeah. But I think to go back to what you were saying about popular culture, what you see in popular culture is fighting. It's sitting around in the mead hall drinking. It's the ships forging across the seas when the sun is usually shining. As one of the things that I liked about the Robert Eggers film, The Northman, was when they're sailing across the North Atlantic, the weather is absolutely awful. And they haven't got the sail up, they're rowing, and it's really, really hard work. So you've got those kind of cliches about how jolly it must be to be on a Viking ship when the sun is shining and nobody is beating you to make you row harder. But what you don't tend to see is those moments in the hall after you come back, as you were saying, Dan, when you would be telling your story of how you killed the dragon. But in fact, what would have been a very important part of life would be exactly that. So you're back, what happened? And somebody telling the saga of, and then we went here and we came across these people and we fought with them. And then having somebody to turn it into poetry, which people could then memorize and then tell it again in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. And pop culture hasn't got the patience for that. No. Because they don't really want to stop everything in the hall while somebody recites a poem. They want drama in a kind of Viking story.
Yeah. And it all, I guess, as well, everything has to be in 30-second bites now as well. There's no long...
But you know what I think?
I
think it's interesting about that point too, actually, because that got me thinking, because this is absolutely... I mean, you could say that it is absolutely medieval and Viking inspired, but it just goes to show also that if you have the right idea and the right people in charge who have the right amount of funding, you can absolutely make that stuff happen. Because I was just... what sparked when you said, to hear, the poem being recited, that I got a movie clip in my head immediately, and that is the scene from Return of the King when Pippin is singing to what's his face, the dad we don't like, while he's eating, and he's singing this beautiful song as this battle scene is happening. And I'm like, that is a way that you could incorporate, even though we don't have melodies, I would assume that some of these poems could potentially have been sung or recited to a beat or something like that.
Oh, very likely, yes.
Yeah, but that is a way that you could actually incorporate that art form into the media that also has all the battles and the violence and stuff.
Yeah. I guess you'd have to do it. It would have to be done in Old Norse and then with subtitles, because there's not many people who can read it, I guess, Old Norse, but also even that is, the pronunciation is also up in the air. There's no, we don't have anyone from the Vikings, so we can't even say, are we saying this correctly? It's the best guess. It's like probably, maybe, but even that is so different people reading the same poem could then also be pronouncing things differently, and neither, I guess, are wrong either.
Yeah, I mean, you probably had regional speech differences. And when you're reciting an Old Norse poem, are you reciting it with the pronunciation when it was composed, or when it was written down, or later still? How do you decide which? Is it going to be the 8th century or 9th century? Is it going to be 11th century? Is it going to be 12th century? So that's why most scholars just use modern Icelandic pronunciation, because it cuts through all those arguments of what Old Norse might have sounded like.
Yeah, because it's really easy to get bogged down in all the details of that.
Yeah, that's for sure.
You mentioned the Northern. What, since we're on Valkyries, what did you think of the Valkyrie at the end? Have you seen it, Max?
No, I haven't yet. You keep mentioning it, and then every time you mention it, I'm like, dang it, I haven't seen it yet.
There is. I'll see if I can find a picture. But you've
I've heard
you've
of
seen
it and
Carolyne.
seen things from it, 100%. But I'm very curious in your take on the Valkyrie there, Caroline.
She I would say she's kind of gangster Valkyrie.
Well,
to a degree.
Is she real or isn't she? That's one of the questions, because she turns up twice, doesn't she? She turns up when Amleth is hanging in the stable in Fjolnir's farm, when Fjolnir has attacked him and sort of left him for almost dead. And then Odin appears in the darkness with his hat and his spear behind him. And then the Valkyrie comes and puts him on her white horse, and they ride off. And the next thing, Amleth is with Olga, the Slav fellow slave and love interest, in a nice warm Icelandic hot pool, recovering. And nearby there's a white horse that she's clearly borrowed from the farm. And so there she's the Valkyrie. But then at the end, when he's dying, there's a vision of him going up. It's very Wagnerian, isn't it? The Valkyries are riding, and the Valkyrie has, the main Valkyrie, who the camera focuses on, has got inlaid teeth, hasn't
like
she? With a kind of tooth grill.
I don't know if it's just like, it won't let me share my
filings across, but I think she's got some jewelry in her mouth as well, and because we do have some evidence of these enamel or jewel inlays. And,
really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's something that Rob Eggers talks about in the commentary. I've done some writing on this film, so I've listened to the director's commentary quite a lot, and I've talked to some of the consultants who worked on the film as well. And so there you've got the latest archaeological evidence for warrior styling, if you like, having these incised grooves and this tooth inlay. But then you've got a mythical woman wearing these fashions, as it were. So I don't know. I think what Rob Eggers quite wants to do in The Northman is to have his cake and eat it. He's saying, this is such a weird world. We can't understand what these people thought or believed or felt. And if we try and get inside their heads, they're believing all this stuff about Valkyries and gods and sacrifice and the undead in the burial mound that Amleth has to go and get the sword from. And so he's inviting you to think about what would it be like if I were in that time and I had to believe. I believed all of this stuff. But at the same time, you're kind of sitting back with a modern point of view and going, that's historical. That's not historical. That's made up. That's symbolic, if you like. All the stuff about the tree of life as well. He has to make visual this kind of idea about how important lineage and inheritance is.
I think it's an amazing example of why we end up with the popular culture of like Viking media that we do, because I commend him completely for the amount of research and the accuracy and trying to be, I guess, as close to source material as he can. And for people like us, that's amazing. And, we watch it and love it. And it's all very much of picking out these little things that are historically accurate and we see. But then for the everyday person who kind of likes Vikings, I think they watch it and go, that's not the Vikings I know. And then they get maybe confused or bored or whatever else of critique.
That's why we need more of that so that we can change what the Vikings look like.
Absolutely. But I think that's kind of, I think it was almost too much for people it was like it was too much for people to kind of understand. Certainly from the outside, I spoke to a lot of people who didn't care about the Viking Age really much. It was a Robert Eggers film. They like Robert Eggers and what he makes, and they kind of just went, "What? I don't really. It's not the Vikings are like that." I was like, "No, it's actually really accurate. It's really good." But I think that it was almost too far one way for a lot of people.
And there's also the question about it, I think, as well, that it was. You can read it as a kind of critique of toxic masculinity, that Hamlet is so driven by his mission of revenge, and he's doing it to avenge his father, who turns out to have been a horrible rapist, to avenge his mother's honor. And then it turns out his mother never loved his father and always really loved the guy who killed the father, and she had been kidnapped. She was a sex slave before she became queen. And so this whole premise of the family that was driving his mission of vengeance turned out to be nothing. And then Olga says to him, "You don't have to do this. You can come with me. We're on a ship. We're leaving Iceland. We're going to Orkney. I'm pregnant with your children. We can go to Orkney. We can make a life for ourselves." And he goes, nah, got to do the vengeance thing. Dives off the boat. And I was going, "You're dead at this point." No, he's swimming back to Iceland. And in part he's saying, "I think my uncle will come to try and have vengeance on us in Orkney." I was going, yeah, no. He was driven by this vengeance that he wasn't going to let go. And the aesthetic of the film seemed to kind of celebrate that, when at the end you got that kind of naked men fighting to the death as this volcano is exploding behind them. And you think, yeah, that's back to the kind of great Viking drama that everybody, a lot of the people in the cinema audience have signed up to see that kind of thing. And not to see some blonde girl saying, "Oh, hey, we could just go and start a family together and we don't have to do all this killing."
You have to have the final volcano battle of the two half-naked guys. Yeah, well, that's, you got to call the boxes. Before we wrap up, I wouldn't mind mentioning this Valkyrie lady here. So
Is she from
I'm not sure how you pronounce it.
I think.
Is it the Hyreken? How do you pronounce
This is not from Oseberg. Not the tapestries, anyway.
No, how do you...
Hilaland? No.
How do you pronounce the... I'm going to find it.
Just put the word in the chat that you're trying to pronounce.
I'm sure it's like Hyreken. I think it comes from a stone. It's the Valkyrie who has...
Yes. So she's the giantess.
She has these snakes for like reins.
Yeah.
But is she sometimes called a Valkyrie?
No, she's a giantess, and she comes to Balder's funeral.
That's the one. I don't know why I thought that she was mentioned as a Valkyrie, but maybe
no, she's riding on a wolf and she's got serpent reins, so she's pretty. But she's a strong girl, it's got to be said, because as they're trying to push the flaming ship into the sea with Balder's body on it, and not even Thor can shift it. And then Hyrrokin has come along as a guest, kind of goes, "Oh, let me have a go." She gets drafted out to sea.
I don't know why.
If you want the job done, get the woman to do it.
Yeah, girl boss.
Mm-hmm.
I like it.
Yeah. I don't know why I had it in my mind that she was mentioned somewhere as a Valkyrie, but obviously not. That's
No,
just...
it's a funny name. I'm not sure what the etymology of it is, but she doesn't have a Valkyrie identity, but she's certainly a fierce lady, so that's almost as good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Who's the most famous Valkyrie?
Brynhilde.
Brynhilde?
Yeah, Brynhilde by a long way, I think.
But again, is she not in some stories? Is she a Valkyrie in some stories she's not? Or is she always?
She's always, well, she's in the Eddic poetry and in Volsunga Saga, the Saga of the Volsungs, which is based on the Eddic poetry. She is always a Valkyrie, but there is this kind of switch that once she's crossed Odin, has been made to sleep on the top of this flaming mountain, she then somehow becomes human. And it's not said explicitly in the saga, but she suddenly acquires a family. So she's got a dead father, she's got a brother, she's got a sister. And what you then get is a lot of family politics about breaking oaths and who should marry whom and so on. And it becomes not really about fighting, it becomes really about kind of Germanic court politics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's I remember when I think I listened. This was I recently got into reading. Before that, I listened to all my books. So I think I listened to the Saga of the Volsungs, and I remember it being. It's just sad, isn't it? It all just ends sad
with
and
everyone dead. Yeah,
the love, like it's a little bit of a love story, or it is a love story, and then it kind of all collapses and everybody dies, and it's, I guess, Romeo and Juliet-esque kind of I guess there's a little bit of that, and it's just like, well, it's all sad.
That reminds me of like the Scandinavian saying that I really like, which is, because it kind of, it gives me that it's not, necessarily a parallel at all, but it's just funny that like there is the Scandinavian tendency of being like, and then we all die in the end, like eventually we'll all just be dead. And that saying is like, when you said that the Volsunga Saga, it's just kind of sad. It's this saying that I love, which is life is like a chicken ramp. It's short and steep and it's full of shit.
Nice.
Well, cattle die, kinsmen die, the self itself must die, but I know one thing that never dies, the glory of every dead man. So that's a more suitable Viking
it's a bit more poetic
epigram to go out on, I think.
I mean, that's one that's brought up all the time, isn't it? That's so popular. Is that
those lines from Halvamaul,